Hello, and welcome to the National Archives Foundation's virtual program series. I'm Patrick Madden, the Executive Director of the National Archives Foundation, and thanks for joining us today. This is a special edition of our programs because we're featuring one of the Cokie Roberts Research Fellows. The Cokie Roberts Research Fund for Women's History supports annual fellowship for emerging and established historians, journalists, authors, or graduate students who perform and publish new research to the general public to elevate women's history using the records held at the National Archives. Recipients of the fellowship will perform research at the National Archives on women's history for a published book, article, essay, film, short series, or art piece. If you'd like to learn more about the fund or previous fellows, please visit our website, archivesfoundation.org. And when you're there, if you're so inspired, you can support the fund with a donation. Our moderator today is Rebecca Boggs Roberts. She's an award-winning writer and educator. Rebecca is the author of 4 books. She's currently the Deputy Director of Events at the Library of Congress and serves as one of my bosses on the board of the National Archives Foundation. She's also served on boards of directors or advisory boards for a number of prestigious historical organizations. Randa Tawil is the 2022 recipient of the Cokie Roberts Fellowship for Women's History, supporting her work on migration history and reproductive justice. Her chapter will be published in a book, Hidden Histories, Unauthorized Migrations from Europe to the United States in the 20th Century, published by the University of Illinois Press. She received her doctorate from Yale University, and she specializes in migration and mobility, ethnic studies, and Arab, Middle Eastern American studies. To learn more about the focus of her research, I'm pleased to welcome Rebecca Roberts to lead today's conversation.
Randa Tawil, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Hi, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here.
So give us a quick recap of your research. What have you been working on with this fellowship?
Yeah, so my research project is on women who arrived into the United States pregnant, but not visibly pregnant, or at least immigration inspectors, public health inspectors didn't notice they were pregnant, or else most likely they would have been deported this is in the turn of the 20th century. And so I look at the experience of these women as they go into hospitals to give birth. So in the United States, there were public charge laws, which said that immigrants who came into the country within a year, and then this was extended to 2 and then 3 throughout the first decade of the 20th century, that people who sought out medical care, public medical care, for a condition they had prior to arrival were subject to deportation. So this is a law that was in place basically so that immigrants, according to the US government, so that immigrants would, use US funds for some disease that they had before they came to the United States. And so a lot of immigrants face this. For example, this isn't tied to pregnancy, but a woman in 1907 was deported for an ovarian cyst because the doctors deemed that it was too big for it just to have grown while she was in the US. So this is how these laws played out. So for women in the early 20th century, the transition going to hospitals was very new. And so a lot of immigrant women went to public hospitals to give birth, but the doctors deemed that they were pregnant before they arrived into the United States, and thus a condition that the women had prior to arrival. So I look at these cases, and what I'm really trying to think about broadly is how obstetrics, medicine, right, which is really exploding in the early 20th century, how that interacts with immigration laws in the US and its effects on the bodies of women and their experiences as they're navigating pregnancy and immigration and the way in which these women's pregnancies and their lives and their choices are understood and interpreted by doctors and immigration inspectors and public health officials in ways that the women really didn't have control over.
And what records are you using? Where are you in the archives?
Yeah, so I look at the immigration records, which is
Uh-huh.
RG85, and I have looked at those records before. This project is different from the book project that I'm working on, but I came upon a record, very, one page, that was about a woman who was up for deportation while I was looking at another project in RG85. And so I was immediately like, what? This is so, what does this even, like, what is going on? This is crazy. And so I kind of had put that to the side because it wasn't super relevant to my other project and I needed to keep going, but it was always in my mind. And so I looked at the RG85 records later when I had more time. And actually I want to make a shout out to a archivist at the National Archives. She's retired now, but Marion Smith, who worked there for quite a while. She helped me actually before I even applied for the fellowship, because I was interested in writing this for something else. And she helped me look through the records, and I found a number in that part of the National Archives.
Archivists are the best.
They are. I always tell my students, find an archivist you love and don't let your claws get out of them. They are going to be the best resource for you. Really, writing history, doing research is a team effort. And although we have kind of one name on the book or chapter or whatever, always read the acknowledgements, because those acknowledgements show you everybody who made it possible.
Do you think that researching women's history specifically has challenges that other genres don't?
Definitely. I think that, particularly historically, I think there are a couple ways that it's difficult or different. So I think in one sense, there isn't as much of a written record for women's lives, daily lives of women, ordinary women, particularly as you go back in history. And some of the reasons are some women were illiterate, or they didn't have time to write things down, or they weren't saved by librarians and archivists, so they weren't deemed important, right? And so in that sense, there's less of a record. And the records that I look at, because I look at sort of ordinary people and particularly immigrants, so poor working class women, oftentimes the records that I confront are written by police, immigration controllers, public health officials, social workers. And so these women, the way I meet them is through someone else's voice, someone's voice that's trying to control and police them, right? And so in that sense, as a historian, you really have to read an archive in a different way. Like, I can't read it and think, well, this is true, this is what happened. Or I can't read it and say, yes, if the officer is saying this woman is sexually deviant, she is, right? You can't do that, because you know that the purpose of this paper is to police this woman, right? And that's true of so many other marginalized groups. This isn't just women. We can think of queer people, we can think of other, immigrants of all genders, whatever. And so I think in that sense, it presents an exciting, different way to look at archives, because, I love the National Archives. I've found so much incredible resources there, right? But at the end of the day, a national archive is telling the story of a nation, right? It's telling a very particular story. There's a reason that the Declaration of Independence is the thing that is featured in the museum, right? And not the immigration records that I look at, to be frank, right? And so when you're dealing with an archive that is built to tell a story that is usually the normative story, right? A story of progress, the story of the nation, these women who don't fit into it, who were deported or who were deemed not fit for the nation, are going to be left out.
Mhm.
And so it takes more creativity. It takes looking at songs and poems, and it takes looking at these records and really thinking about what the lives of these women would have been, what their strategies to evade or to evade police or to allow themselves to be acceptable to the nation. You kind of have to think in that sense, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Are there any documents or sort of exciting finds that you had one of those, researcher holy grail moments where you're like, this is so
Oh,
cool?
definitely. I mean, first of all, it's kind of strange as a researcher because, at least for me, I'm researching kind of the darkest moments in people's lives. And so it's this weird thing because you go like, oh my God, it's so exciting. But at the same time, it's horrible,
So heartbreaking, right?
and so I try not to like get excited about this research. It's more like I'm excited to tell the story. I'm excited to meet this. I say I meet the people. I'm excited to spend time with this person and really think about their strategies, how they, and what I can learn from them about power, about history, about historical actors. I personally I really try to learn from the people I study, not really impose theory onto them or impose my ideas onto them, but say like, what do they teach me about US history? So I think for me, I think what was quite interesting, and again, I'm gonna shout out to Marianne because she's the one who found it. Um, it was a whole archive, a whole, like a whole file on what are they called? Maternity homes in Detroit. And so what I found, so when I started this project, I was really focused on Ellis Island. So women who came in through the East Coast, European, Eastern European, Mediterranean women. And then I found this archive on Detroit. And it was all about these Canadian women who came to Detroit to give birth and have their pregnancies in these maternity homes where they could be secluded from their families. So basically, we're talking women, let's say in Ontario, who got pregnant out of wedlock. And, because of their patriarchal communities, this would really mean, almost excommunication, almost real ostracizing. And so they would tell their parents, I'm going to Detroit to work in a factory, or I'm going to be a maid. And then they would go to these maternity homes and kind of spend their time there. In the second decade of the 20th century, we see the government immigration inspectors on the federal level doing an investigation into these homes to basically rid them of these Canadian women. And what's really interesting about this is that, to me at least, is that, first of all, it really shows a difference between Ellis Island and the US-Canadian border, because on the US-Canadian border, there was much more, back and forth transit, right? And so people weren't inspected when they traveled. It was up to the immigration officer. So that's one. Two, these women who came to these maternity homes did so, they paid, right? These weren't public homes. And so you have women from Canada who come into the US legally and who are paying their own, stay in these homes. And yet they are deported and policed. And so the government launched a big investigation. They went to all of these homes and they deported Canadian women who were 8, 9 months pregnant. And so I think it's a real insight into the way that law can be weaponized and used on kind of the most vulnerable people, that the women were actually deported for failure to be inspected. Although the failure, of course, was from the immigration officers. And so it's a quite interesting way, I think, insight into these laws, right? Because at the beginning, I'm talking about public charge laws and, oh, these, technically broke the law if you were pregnant, although we can talk about when does pregnancy start in 1900, right? That's a whole other question. But these women in Canada, first of all, they are Anglo, they are white, right? So
English speaking, presumably, right?
exactly. So seemingly not kind of unfit, but we see how white women also get kind of subsumed in this police state for immigration. And in their case, their whiteness doesn't shield them from deportation. And it's really interesting to also see how some of these women strategized to not be deported. And also these maternity homes in Detroit. It's incredible when there are investigations, because what you get is a whole list of addresses of these places that no longer exist, but of these mostly European older women who are midwives, and who run these homes. And again, this is at a moment where midwifery is being kind of put down, and birthing in a hospital with a doctor, with a professional, is very important. And so what we actually see in this moment as well is newspapers talking about how backwards midwives are, how backwards these old women, a lot came from Germany, a lot came from Eastern Europe, how sort of this is the old world, this is the bad. And birthing in a hospital with a doctor is the new world. And so
A male
we're
doctor,
also seeing,
right?
a male doctor, right, who has that degree that they can hang. And so we're also seeing this intense moment of change that is totally in medicine, that's really related to immigration and really related to xenophobia, etc. So there's a lot of connections for me. Like, that's what's most exciting about research, is connections that you wouldn't necessarily make on your own, right? You wouldn't, I never thought of this before I actually saw the files. And that's what's, so I think that's the thing. It's like you learning from these women, you're learning how they dealt with these laws, how the laws were put on them. And then you as a researcher can start saying like, oh, well, this doctor, he's so sure that she was pregnant, but in 1900, actually people believed that pregnancy started when you felt the first kick. So did the woman think that she was pregnant on the boat? No, right? Would a midwife even say that she was pregnant? Or do they have a different idea of what pregnancy looks like? So it's all of a sudden you have this file, and then you can start to kind of associate, read more, learn more about something, and then these bigger questions pop up.
And so where are you in sort of your timeline of being able to share this in terms of conferences or publication, or
Yeah.
when do
So
we get to learn more?
yes, so this is actually coming out in a book, anthology, on irregular European migration to the United States in the 20th century. And so it's edited by Deborah King and Danielle Battisti. And so it will be out. It's in its final revision and proof process. So it should be out next year, which I'm so excited about. And I will be presenting this also at the Organization of American Historians Conference in April. And so, yes, I am extremely excited for this to come out and sort of see what people think, and hopefully connect with historians and scholars who are working on this kind of stuff as well, because again, we all learn from each other and grow. So this is one iteration, and I am hoping this becomes a larger project for my second book. But that's a longer timeline than this coming out.
Do you have any advice for future Koki fellows?
Well, I think my advice is actually really take advantage of the archivists and the wonderful National Archive staff. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but truly for me, I have gone to the archives before. And so I am familiar with like how it works, but to be able to talk with the staff, to be able to meet, some of the archivists in a more, be able to spend more time with them than I had before was really a gift, because the archives are huge and they're not necessarily always intuitive in the way that they're filed. And that, has to just do with archives. That's how it works everywhere. And so to kind of have this space and this support to do this research was so important. And I think what I realized was you can really kind of grow, you can take advantage of it as a fellow. And so I would say, yeah, make connections with archivists, with the staff. It has really been a actually true pleasure.
Well, Randa, Tawil, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Yes, I thank you. Honestly, this has been so wonderful.
And thank you all for joining us. We are grateful to our donors and our sponsors who support our outreach work like this virtual program. You can support our Cokie Roberts Fellowship Fund, be a part of the National Archives Foundation by becoming a donor today. Join by visiting our website, archivesfoundation.org. And if you enjoy museum gift stores and unique historic merchandise, be sure to visit nationalarchivesstore.org to check out the terrific women's history and women's rights selection on our e-store. On behalf of the National Archives Foundation, thank you so much for joining us.